Well, good evening, everyone. We are about to get started. I'm Mary Teresa McCombe. I'm the Executive Director and co-founder of Hearts to Homes. Thank you for joining us this evening for our first virtual fundraising event. So I'll admit it. I'll admit it. I have done a trial run and sampled the wines and cheeses for this evening's tasting already. I'm sure you will not only enjoy what you taste, but also what you learn. Can everyone hear me? Give me a wave if you can hear me. Great. So before we begin, I would like to recognize the leadership of our co-chairs, Nicole Grogan and Chris Trezano. They are board members who took on the role of turning this concept into a reality. And they made a great team and helped us to exceed our goal of raising $10,000 this evening to support young adults who are aging out of foster care and embarking on their independent lives. This event is being recorded because we have some people, especially on the West Coast, who aren't able to join us at 7 on the East Coast. And so we're going to record it and then put it up for them to see. With your permission, I would like to share a few slides with you about what Hearts to Homes does. Okay, that didn't work. Well, that's not very good, was it? Oh, brother. Let's try that again. So much for my technological skills. I'd like to thank our sponsors, our wine supplier, G. Griffin Wines and Spirits in Rye, New York, and our cheese supplier, Cheesemonger Box and the Fairfield and Greenwich Cheese Company, located in Cos Cob and Fairfield, Connecticut. Doug and Chris, thank you very much for your support. I'd also like to thank the following individuals for their sponsorships: the Arcaros, the Berardis, the Fairs, the Grogans, the Kellys, and the Langs. Also the Leitners, Janet and Kevin Morley, the Murphys, Deborah Stolrick, the Trezanos, and the Vezas. I'd also like to thank the Wrights, Barbara Robertson, and Samantha Scher. For those of you who don't know anything about our organization, Hearts to Homes is dedicated to offering a helping hand when a young adult is ready to make a leap from foster care to independence. Approximately 700 young adults age out of care each year in the New York City and Westchester County area. These are individuals who have never been adopted or successfully reunited with their families. Tonight, we have, without the assistance of Hearts to Homes, the majority of these young adults would move into apartments with few possessions and little furniture. These pictures are examples of what apartments look like before Hearts to Homes comes in. It is not an exaggeration to say that most would have a mattress on the floor and not much else. In fact, in the photo on the right, you'll see that some don't even have a mattress. This is a photo of a pile of blankets that a mom and her toddler were sleeping on for several weeks in their apartment before our furniture delivery was made. On the left is an empty living room that had been like that for 2 months before our furniture delivery was made. Our process is simple. We currently work with 11 foster care agencies who refer young adults to us at this critical junction in their lives. We provide these individuals with a choice of over 80 household items and furniture that we consider to be essential. Items like bath towels, dishes, cutlery, pillows, sheets, and a comforter. Furniture, like a love seat, a dinette set, and a nightstand. The photo on the right is what the empty living room that was in the previous slide looks like now. A portion of your ticket for tonight's tasting will help us to provide household essentials so that these young people will have some of the things that we all take for granted: pots and pans to cook in, a shower curtain or a hair dryer, a television, or a table to put it on. The average age of a youth referred to us is 21 years old. 99% of those referred to us are people of color. 25% are male. 1/3 are young mothers. All have at least a high school diploma or GED. Approximately 1/4 of those referred to us are high school students, are college students. And a few who have been referred to us actually have a college degree. 93% of those referred to us are residents of New York City. Tonight, through your participation and generosity, we have raised over $13,500, which is enough for 5 1/4 apartments for people just like the alumni you see on the screen. Tonight, we have over 200 people joining us for this tasting. Because there are so many, I'm asking everyone to remain on mute. And I would ask that if you have any questions as we go through the evening, that you post them to the chat, which should show up as the lightly colored rectangle on the side of your screen. I'd also like to recommend that you use speaker view to make the presentation easier for you to see. That setting should be found in the top right or top left of your screen, depending on the type of device that you're using. And now I would like to turn the evening over with my final thanks to our guide for tonight, my son, Ryan McCombe. Ryan, you need to unmute. You are still muted.
You got to improvise.
I want you all to know that we have done this many, many times to try and prevent these types of technological issues. There you go, Ryan. But now your picture's done.
That's as best I'm gonna go. Okay. All right. I think we're good. Can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
That's a yes. Fabulous. All right. Well, good evening, and thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to Hearts to Homes for having me and for the tremendous work you do for folks in our community who are very much so in need. Again, my name is Ryan McCombe. I'm going to be your tasting guide for this evening. A couple of quick notes before we begin. I've heard from many folks that the idea of wine and cheese tasting brings a lot of stress, or at least a lot of concerns, that maybe you won't know the language or you won't get a sense for tasting shoe leather and old oak in some of the things that we're tasting today. But let me assure you, you can put those concerns aside. Today is designed to be, in the words of famous New York City cheesemonger Ann Saxelby, fun, unpretentious, and a little bit of an adventure. So I hope we have that little bit of an adventure together today. Just as a quick heads up for everyone, I do have a certification in cheese that I got from the famous Murray's Cheese in Greenwich Village. So that is my primary area of expertise. But as for wine, like love and marriage, the horse and carriage, you can't have one without the other. So needless to say, I'm going to do my best to get you through the wine as well. And I appreciate, by the way, a few laughs that I can see on the screen. At least some of you got that joke. Cheese and wine stem from the exact same human impulse, right? It's to take something perishable, milk or grapes, and to preserve it in such a way that you can enjoy it when the harvest is perhaps not so bountiful. Needless to say, in the creation of wine and of cheese, a lot of accidents happened, but a lot of humans got involved. And through that combination of luck and skill, thousands of varieties of cheese and wine have developed all over the world. And they brought with them the very animals and plants that made them, the landscape in which they were made, and ultimately shaped by the hands of the humans who made them. I think that's what makes wine and cheese so fascinating, so diverse. We're certainly not going to cover head to toe tonight, but I hope that you're able to take away a few interesting tidbits that you can use to explore that broader world as time goes on. You might think that tasting is just that. We're just going to put some things in our mouth, see what the taste buds have to say. But I'm going to encourage you today to use 4 senses. There's no sense in hearing cheese, but we are going to take a look at it. We're going to smell it. We're going to taste it. And ultimately, we're going to feel the texture that wine and cheese can bring. So we're going to use 4 out of our 5 senses today. Couple more things just to, as a quick heads up. First one is if you taste it, it's there. There are hundreds of chemical compounds in every single thing you see here in front of me. And I'm going to do my best to guide you today, what I think might be most prominent, what you might be able to sense. But if I miss something or you think you taste something, you're probably right. It's probably there. We're talking hundreds of chemical compounds, and I'm going to do my best to get you through some of them. The second one is if you like it, it's good. I know lots of folks out there, especially in the wine world, but also in the cheese world, concern themselves with price. That's not what we're after today. We're after exploring different varieties, different styles. I've had inexpensive wine and cheese that's delicious and expensive wine and cheese that's not. So if you like it, it is good. And I hope you take away something that you like tonight. So with that in mind, I think we can go ahead and get started. If you haven't, by the way, poured your wine yet, now would be a good time to do so, just in the interest of everybody's time. We'll go through this fairly swiftly, but I hope you get some good tidbits out of it. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to taste from mildest to strongest. If you're ever doing a wine tasting or a cheese tasting, I would highly recommend that you taste from mildest to strongest. And the reason for that is you want to make sure that you're getting the full flavor out of every wine and cheese that you taste. And if the first thing you get is extremely powerful, that's going to stick with you and it's going to overwhelm the milder flavors that come later. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the round white thing here. This is Vermont Creamery Coupole. Coupole meaning cupola, like the dome on the top of a barn. That's kind of what it looks like. This is made in Vermont. And we're going to go ahead and get started again. What do we see? What do we smell? What do we taste? And what do we feel? So let's start with what we see. And what I see is a brainy white lump here in front of me. All right. And that is indicative of the fact that this is a cheese that has been aged. And specifically, it's been aged in the presence of a particular mold, Geotrichum candidum. It's added to the milk during the cheese making process. And it's the exact same mold, by the way, that you find on the outside of brie. As it blooms on the outside of the cheese, that is to say, grows as it ages, it starts to give this brainy white to maybe white and yellow on the outside. And that blooming mold, by the way, gives the classification for this cheese. It's called a bloomy rinded cheese for the way that the mold blooms on the outside. So that's enough looking at just the outside of it. If we want to taste it, we've got to go ahead and open it up. I'm just going to give it a slice here. And as we split it open, we notice a couple of things. What else we can see, right? The first thing I notice here is that the inside of this is bright, stark white. So white, in fact, that my camera is not picking up even the little definitions. That's going to be our first hint that this is a goat cheese. The reason being, goats cannot digest beta carotene in grass. It's what makes your butter yellow. But since goats can't digest it, it doesn't come out in the milk. If you come across a cheese, especially a fresh cheese, that is white as can be, you are probably looking at a goat's cheese. The second thing I notice here, how about from a textural standpoint? Well, the center of it looks a heck of a lot like the goat's cheese you may be familiar with from the log they sell at the grocery store, right? The French would call it chèvre, or we might just call it goat's cheese like you find on a salad. And actually, that's very close to what this is. This is a fresher goat's cheese. But I also notice a second texture. You see, along the outside of the rind, you can see this kind of gooier texture. In cheese terms, We're going to call this inside the paste, and we're going to call that gooier texture on the outside the cream line. And what the cream line is, if you have a young cheese, I'm holding a very young cheese here. And the way I can tell is there's not very much cream line. But we sent over 100 of these out. Some of you may have ones that came from the shipment before, and you might have a thicker cream line. What's going on here is that Geotrichum candidum is starting to further break down the proteins and the fats in the cheese. And that breaking down of the protein and fats is developing this second texture in the cheese. If you have a brie, by the way, you don't have a paste and a cream line, you have all cream line. That's why it's so gooey inside. That Geotrichum candidum has eaten all the way through the paste and given you that gooey, delicious texture that brie brings. So that's what we can see. Let's go ahead and give it a smell. And what I would recommend doing, by the way, if you cut yourself a piece, is smelling right along the rind. That's where the flavor is going to be the most intense. So what can we smell? Well, Geotrichum candidum gives off immediately a yeasty smell. Other folks may smell it and think mushroom. And especially if you have an older, thicker cream line, you might also be smelling this and thinking, well, it smells a little bit like wet socks or some other unpleasant, cheesy smell. And there's a reason for that, by the way. It's not because your cheese took too long in shipping. What that's due is to the presence of a compound called butyric acid. See, when the Geotrichum candidum is eating away at the paste, it's also producing that chemical compound that has that kind of wet socks type of flavor. You also find that in Parmesan cheese. You also find that in Hershey's chocolate. So if you've ever given someone from outside the United States American-style chocolate, they are sometimes surprised to find that flavor in their chocolate. But that is, again, due to the presence of butyric acid. Those are some of the things we can smell. Maybe you guys can smell some of the others. Now let's go ahead and give it a taste. And in this case, I'd recommend place it on your tongue. Go ahead and squish it around your mouth a little bit. If you prefer to use a cracker, go ahead and use a cracker. But if you do use a cracker, I recommend flipping it upside down before you eat it. Because, of course, if you put the cracker on your tongue, the only thing your tongue is going to taste is the cracker. Some folks are going to ask, do I eat the rind? Yes. By the FDA, all rinds are edible. Not all are palatable. So if your rind is wax or foil or plastic, don't eat it. If it's mold, it's part of the cheese. Give it a taste. So what can we taste here? There's a couple of things that I taste here, right? The first thing that I taste is primarily textural, right? I feel the fudginess of the cheese. I feel the thick, heavy paste and the gooey cream line, right? The second thing I notice, particularly as I've swallowed the piece of cheese, is I notice a yeastiness to the cheese, and honestly, not much else, right? This is a very fresh cheese. So as a result, what you're getting here is primarily textural, a little bit of flavor. This is a cheese that's only been aged 3 to 5 weeks. So you haven't had a lot of time for a lot of intense flavors to develop. This is a style of cheese, though this particular one comes from Vermont, that has been made in France's Loire Valley for a couple of 100 years. They're known for fresh goat cheese, and they're also known for the first wine that we have here today. This is Concy. Concy is just a couple of miles from a town you may know called Sancerre. Both towns in France, in the Loire Valley, in and around the Loire River, are known for a particular wine of a particular kind of grape. And that grape is Sauvignon Blanc. This one in particular, made by Domaine Mardin. The Mardin family has been on their land on the Cher River for about 200 years. And they're making this wine with Sauvignon Blanc grapes or vines that are 50 to 80 years old. They make 100% of the wine on their property. So we're going to go ahead and talk about our first pairing principle. If you're thinking about pairing, here's a cheese in the style of the Loire Valley. and a wine in the style of the Loire Valley. If it grows together, it goes together. See, human beings, sure, they'd like something to eat, but they'd really like it if it tasted good. And so it turns out if you get wine and cheese from the same place, those are artisans that have been making those things together for hundreds of years. It's probably a good place to start. We'll go ahead and move to our first wine now. First thing we're going to do again, we're going to look, we're going to smell, we're going to taste, we're going to feel. So let's give it a look. Right? First thing that I notice, this is a very, very light wine, a straw color, certainly not a yellow. That gives us our first hint that this could be, if I didn't know any better, a Sauvignon Blanc grape, and also that it probably has not been aged in oak. The oak imparts a darker color to the wine. We can go ahead as well and swirl it. We can either do that right here in our hand, or if you'd prefer, you can place it down and give it a swirl. There's a couple of reasons that we're swirling, one of which is we're going to aerosolize the compounds in that wine. The second thing is we're going to go ahead, see if we can look for some legs on this wine. See, some folks have been told that legs, that is to say the little drippy lines that come down the side, are a sign of wine quality. And I am here to be the first to tell you that that is nonsense. It is not quality, but it is chemistry. See, what happens is wine is a mixture of alcohol and water. And as the alcohol evaporates faster than the water when you swirl the wine, the more evaporation that happens, the more you're going to see legs on the side of the glass. So if someone tells you it's a high quality wine, look at the legs, you know they are full of it. That's the look. Now that we've given it a swirl, let's go ahead and give it a smell. Now, if you have a better nose than me, you might be able to do that from here. I need to do that from here. I recommend two smells, by the way. One quick and pull it away. And the second one, take a moment, maybe even close your eyes and do it a little bit longer. And I'll tell you what I get from this wine, but again, this is one of those areas where you might have a very different opinion than me. Sauvignon Blanc is often known for a grapefruity scent on the nose, and I don't necessarily get that here. What I do get is a strong sense of tropical fruit, perhaps something like a melon. To me, this wine transports me to a place where there's fruity drinks and suntan lotion. So let's talk for one quick minute about the nose of wines and the crazy things that people talk about when they smell wine. Right? A lot of times you'll hear things like freshly cut grass or shoe leather, things that maybe you've eaten, but I know I haven't. So how do things taste like that? Well, remember that your tongue can really only taste 5 flavors: salt, sour, sweet, umami, and one which is escaping me, bitter. That's the 5th one. That's all your tongue can taste. The rest is taken care of by your nose. So when I'm asking you, what do you smell? What might it taste like? What we're really asking is, where does this transport you? And no doubt about it, this transports me to somewhere tropical. Let's go ahead and give it a taste. In this case, I'm actually going to recommend that you give it 2 tastes, just like 2 smells. Right? The first taste is getting your taste buds and, more importantly, your salivary glands used to the acidity. And the second one, go ahead and swallow it, breathe in, and then breathe out. So what we're getting going is your retronasal olfaction. It's the idea that when I breathe out, I'm continuing to taste through the air, through that, again, the work that our nose does in terms of the taste. And this is where tropical transitions to not so tropical. In terms of flavors, I get an apple or perhaps pear sort of taste here. The other thing that I get is a minerality, a mineral quality. This wine in particular, the grapes were grown in very gravelly soil. And so from a taste standpoint, particularly on the retronasal side, I'm getting that feeling that perhaps I'm drinking wine standing by a waterfall crashing over the rocks. Perhaps you've thought of something else somewhere along the way. But I hope you enjoy the wine. Give it a try with the cheese. You might notice that the acidity in the wine, the brightness, the fruitiness, is helping you to cut through the fudginess, the thickness, the richness of the Coupole. We're also going to pair it with our second cheese. This is Manchego. I think you'll find something very interesting when you think about how this is named, right? Coupole, Vermont Creamery, if you saw the box. says what it is and who made it right there on the front of the package. This is just called Manchego. What's up with that? What's interesting is this doesn't tell you anything, but this tells you everything. See, in the old world in Europe, there are protected styles of wine and cheese, things that have been made in the same place, the same way for hundreds of years. That's not true in the United States. You might know, for example, that champagne can only be made in Champagne. Concy can only be made in and around Concy, and Manchego can only be made in La Mancha. This cheese in particular, made by 1605 Queseria, is made in particular from sheep. Manchego is always sheep's milk, from one particular farm, Finca, whatever is it, Sierra La Solana, in La Mancha, Spain. And that is the important piece of the puzzle. Always sheep's milk, always in La Mancha, Spain. Now, you might be asking, why don't I see sheep's milk cheese more? The answer to that is sheep are a pain in the rear end. See, a cow can produce 70 pounds of milk a day. A goat even can produce 6 to 8 pounds of milk a day. But a sheep, or in this case a ewe, you're lucky if you get 1 to 2 pounds of milk per day out of a ewe. So you need a lot of sheep to run a profitable sheep cheese-based business. But the good news is sheep's milk has twice the butterfat content of cows or goat's milk. So one, it's perfect for cheese. And two, it's going to give us a hint, especially if you've been building your board for a while, that we're looking at sheep's milk. So if you start to see a glistening on the outside of your cheese that's been left out for a while, that glistening is coming from the fat. There's so much fat in Manchego, it's going to start to leach out as the cheese gets warm. So that's Manchego. Let's go ahead and start again. What do we see? The first thing that I notice here is that this cheese is not bright white. So hint, not a goat. The second thing that I notice is right here along the rind, right? This is a natural rind, no wax, no foil, no plastic, no cloth. But it's got this unique grass pattern. See, this is because of the way that Manchego is made. They take the curds, cheeses curds and whey, by the way, for those little Miss Muffet fans out there, which is basically cheese that's been curdled in some way. They'll take the curds and they'll pack them into grass baskets. And those grass baskets leave this impression here on the outside. So those are the primary things that we see. Now, what do we smell? You can cut this, or I'm just gonna, don't mind me, I'm just gonna take the whole thing. And again, give it a smell along the rind. There's a few things going on here, right? The first one is there's a nuttiness to this cheese. Something I happen to know about Finca Sierra La Solana is they make almonds and olives on the same farm. So not surprisingly, you get some of that nuttiness coming through in the smell. There's a second thing I get here in the smell, and there's no better way to put it than this smells like sheep, like wool, like lanolin. I saw somebody placed a comment earlier that sheep also make good wool. That they do, and I can smell it right here in the rind of the cheese. So that's what we can smell. Let's go ahead and cut it, and we'll give it a taste. Something that you will notice, and you may have noticed this on the last side too, is especially with these aged cheeses, this one, by the way, well, we'll talk about that in a moment, the closer you get to the rind, the more intense the flavor is going to be. So if you like intensity or you want to try for full intensity, eat by the rind. Again, you can eat this rind, natural rind. If you want it to be a little milder, go for the center. We get a few things here. First thing I get, this is gamey, right? Compared to the first one, very, very mild, but there's a gaminess to this cheese. And the other thing that I can taste is a hay type of flavor, right? Again, these are sheep that have gone out and grazed on grass, and some of that grass is coming through here in the cheese. Texturally, what do I feel? Well, especially compared to the first one, which was moist and rich and heavy. This is not, this is drier. See, this cheese was packed into grass baskets, and then it was aged for 6 to 8 months. What's going on in those grass baskets? Moisture is coming in, allowing the cheese to dry and intensify. So this is crumblier. In fact, if you were to take the edge of the cheese and actually break it, you can start to see the exact texture of those curds that have gone into the grass baskets. Go ahead and try this with the Concis. Let the gaminess of this cheese be cut through with the bright fruitiness of the wine, or we'll try pairing it here with our second wine. This is a Pinot Noir, and it's a Pinot Noir from the Willamette Valley in Oregon, which is basically a perfect place to make Pinot Noir. Surrounded on 3 sides by mountains, and it's foggy virtually all the time. Pinot Noir grapes love being foggy all the time. And so it's a perfect place to grow this kind of grape. Notice again that this, by the way, is an American wine. So if I look here on the bottle, we're not going to be able to see it in the camera, right? What do we see? We see the name of the wine, Umami. We see the type of grape here next. And then the final thing we see is the place. Compare that American style wine to the French style wine, where the largest thing we see is the place that it was made. By the way, made by a family, made by a company, but no lesser a quality of wine. Another thing that you're going to notice, this one came with a cork. This one came with a screw top. 20 years ago, that's your hint that this wine's probably not very good. But in 2020, that's no longer the case. Some of the highest end winemakers in the country, including in Napa and Sonoma, are using screw tops on their wine bottles. So if you were using that as shorthand, I hope that this wine will convince you that it's no longer a sign of quality. Let's go ahead and begin with our see, smell, taste, and feel. Right, first thing, what do we see? Well, the Court of Master Sommeliers divides red wines into 3 categories: ruby, garnet, ruby, and purple. If I give this one a swirl, it's a light red wine. It's certainly not the deep purple of a Merlot or a Cabernet, probably in the ruby range, but if I swirl it, maybe trending toward garnet. Go ahead and give it a pause. See quite a few legs forming, at least here in my glass. Let's go ahead and give it a smell. Again, 2. Quick one, give it a moment, and a slow one. Now, this is where I find this wine is somewhat unique. If you're familiar with Willamette Valley Pinot Noirs, you might know that they're often described, especially on the nose, as earthy or wet leaves, wet forest floor, right? Some of these kind of fall flavors come through a lot. And I don't get that here. Honestly, what I get in this wine in particular is jammy. It's red fruit, strawberry, raspberry, but not fresh and bright like we saw here in the white wine, but deeper, like a jammed or a stewed fruit. And this might sound crazy to you, but one of the places this transports me is like I walked up into the attic, an old dusty attic, and I've opened up a steamer chest, right? It's got a mustiness to it, but it's not an earthiness. It's not a wet mustiness. It's more drier, dustier. And finally, go ahead and give it a taste. I notice a few things here, right? First is, this is a fruit-forward wine, getting quite a lot in the way of dark fruits, as well as some of those jammier light fruits that we tasted earlier. The second thing is I notice I can feel the alcohol. This is a slightly high alcohol wine, and I can feel it in the back of my throat. Average is about 13.5% ABV. This is 13.8. It's a little high on its own, but you can actually be up to 1% off on your labeling and still be in the clear as far as the Department of Agriculture is concerned. So this might even be a higher alcohol wine even than that. But I find it to be delicious. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and give it a moment again. What I don't taste here, and if you're familiar with big, bold red wines, you might be expecting, is a lot of tannins. Tannins are that drying, lipstick to your teeth sort of flavor, or like I stuck a tongue depressor on my tongue. Pinot Noir, not typically a high tannin wine. It makes for a nice, smooth drinking. This is a mellow wine, and that mellow, stewed mustiness is going to go fantastically well with our final cheese. Our final cheese is Cabot cloth-bound cheddar. Since most folks are familiar with cheddar, right? By show of hands, we've all seen or heard of cheddar cheese before. All right, I see a few hands going. So since everyone's familiar with cheddar, let's talk about cheddar cheese. First thing is, this is a cow's milk cheese. We know it's not a goat because it's not bright white, and we know it's not a sheep because it's not crying yet. This is a cow's milk cheese, and in particular, this cheese was made from Cabot Cooperative Creamery in Vermont. If you've been to a grocery store and looked in your dairy cabinet, you might have seen Cabot cheeses right there in every normal grocery store, right? This is made from that exact same milk. Goes through what's called the cheddaring process. So again, we drain off the whey from the curds. We're going to heat it up. We're going to take big blocks of curd, salt them, and stack them on top of each other. Let them stay warm and pressing themselves, rotating occasionally to acidify. That acid is what we think of when we think of sharpness in cheddar. When they get to the right level of acidity, we put them through basically a wood chipper and then pack them into molds. And this is where the Cabot you find in the grocery store and the Cabot you have in front of you go two different directions. See, most gets packed in plastic, like the Cracker Barrel white and yellow that you're used to. But this cheese in particular is brought through a traditional English style. And that traditional English style, by the way, England as in Cheddar Gorge, where the name cheddar comes from, is this. We take the cheese, we wrap it in cheesecloth, we cover that cheesecloth in lard, and then we let it sit in a cage and age, in a cave and age. This one for 9 to 13 months, up to over a year, sitting in a cave, growing mold on the outside of that cloth. Hopefully none of you actually have the cloth, but if you look at the rind of your cheese, you can see the imprints of the cloth right there. So this does two things, right? Cloth is more breathable than plastic is. So again, like the manchego, water comes out, you get a drier cheese, but the mold that grows on the outside, if any of you want to look at your cheese, you might notice an intensity here along the outside, adds to the intensity of that flavor. We'll go through it one more time. See, smell, taste, and feel. What do we see? My cheese is yellow to honestly almost brown. You even see that very intense color here on the outside. I see that it's not bright white and it's not weeping. We covered that earlier, so it's probably not cow, or rather, it's probably not goat or sheep. Now let's go ahead to what we smell. Cutting a piece off again. Smell it here along the rind, and wow, that is an intense cheese. There's a lot going on here. There's a grassiness to this cheese. There's a, honestly, funkiness to this cheese that has to do with the molds that grew on the outside of that cloth. And we'll go ahead and give it a taste. And there's a lot going on there. This is a barnyardy cheese. There's no two ways about that. This is an intense cheese. 9 to 13 months has allowed those flavors to intensify. And I'm on the farm here. Barnyardy, grassy. I can taste the grass the cows were eating. I can taste the environment that they were in. But there's a unique cheddar flavor here too, something recognizable that I'm used to from my block cheddars that I get in the grocery store. So hopefully this is something a little bit different for everyone. Paired with the Pinot Noir, there's a sense of place here. And that's what I find so fascinating about wine and cheese. There's a sense of place, the animals, the landscape, and the people everywhere along the way. So that brings us basically to the end of my formal comments. We've gone through 3 cheeses. And think about this. A goat cheese, a sheep cheese, and a cow cheese. A French style, a Spanish style, and an English style. A white wine and a red wine. French wine and an American wine. A wine with a cork, and a wine with a cap. We've explored a lot of different variations here today. And what I'd encourage you to do over the next couple of minutes as you enjoy wine and cheese with whoever it is you're on with, try different variations. What do you like? What do you not like? What works? What doesn't work? Mix it up. Check it out. I hope that you've got a base from for today from which to explore moving forward. And I'll conclude today's comments with this. I want to thank everyone for their attention. I want to thank Hearts to Homes for the tremendous work they do and for having me. It's truly an honor to be here. I want to say thank you again to G. Griffin Wines in Rye for supplying the wonderful wines, to Fairfield Greenwich Cheese Company for supplying the delicious cheese. And finally, I want to thank every artisan that's had a hand in our experience today. These are folks who are craftsmen, and I want to thank each and every one of them. Thank you guys for being here. I'm going to stick around. I see some questions coming along the way, but if you want to conclude your evening at this moment, thank you again for being here. I hope you got a lot out of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan. And there's a couple of questions for you, Ryan.
I am.
Here, which wine do you prefer? Which wine do you prefer, and which cheese do you prefer?
Which one? Oh, that's an unfair question. You can't ask the guy who picked them. Which one? I picked ones I like. That's why I got to pick. Honestly, between the two of these, if I had to pick a preference, I really enjoy this Sauvignon Blanc. It's very like the acidity is beautiful. It's bright. It helps with, quite frankly, all three of these cheeses. But when it comes to me and cheese, I am all for the Cabot Clothdown cheddar. I like intense cheeses. I like aged Goudas. I like blue cheeses, and I like this intense flavor a great deal. But that's only because you twisted my arm. Honestly, I like all of them.
And Ryan, when you go to a cheese store, someone's asking, when you go to a cheese store, there's so much to choose from. How do you make selections if you want to experiment with different types of cheeses?
That's an awesome question. The first thing I would say is if you're going to a cheese shop, a cheesemonger, trust the cheesemongers. These are cheese professionals. These are folks who want you to come back, so they want you to like what it is that they have. The other thing that I'd encourage you to do is to talk about the kinds of flavors or things that you like, even if the terms seem somewhat crazy, right? Hey, I don't want a barnyardy cheese because I tried this and got me out. I'd like a fruity cheese. I'd like a cheese that is mild. If you can identify the flavors, and they don't have to be cheese flavors, and honestly, you don't have to sound like you've been through a multi-day class in cheese aging caves and all the other things. You can just say, hey, here's what I like, here's what I don't, here's what I'm looking for. What would you recommend? Cheesemongers are professionals. I highly recommend relying on them. But the other thing is, don't be afraid when assembling your own cheese board to think about things like sheep, goat, cow. Mix it up in different ways. Think about things like young, medium, old. And so you get a variety of textures and flavors along the way. If you find that everything you've gotten looks like this, you might not have the most diverse tasting experience. But if you get a combination of textures, flavors, and can avoid anything that you've tasted today and said, nope, I think you're in a good place. Trust your cheesemonger.
Got it. One person is asking how long these cheeses would last refrigerated. I guess if they're not going to finish them tonight, how long can they hang on to them for?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So it depends. Up to a week or two is probably fine. A couple of things to think about. Cheeses like to breathe. So if you can repack them in the paper they came in, that would be great. You can wrap them in plastic, but plastic doesn't allow the cheese to breathe. Remember, this is effectively still a living thing, right? The molds and the bacteria, et cetera. So you should be able to get another week or two out of them. However, a couple of things to think about. If you start to smell ammonia, cheese is no good. You might want to find your way away from that cheese. The second thing is, none of these are molded cheeses, but you know what mold looks like that's blue cheese and what's not. If you start to see mold growing on your cheese, honestly, with a thicker piece of cheese like this, you can cut it away and the rest of the cheese is probably fine. But you should get a week or two out of it. If you smell ammonia, toss it. And if you start to see mold, it's probably past its prime.
Okay, and I'm going to make this the last question so that we can wrap up. A lot of people see honey on cheese boards with cheese. What does honey pair well with in a cheese?
That's an awesome question. Honey pairs particularly well with a couple of things. Funkier flavors, think things like blue cheeses and more intense flavors, I think things like Parmesan, aged Parmesan. When you see honey in a board, what you're thinking about is the balance of flavor, right? Again, we talked about the things our tongue can experience: sweet, salty, bitter, sour, and umami. If I have a very umami heavy cheese, like a Parmesan, like a blue cheese, I might want to take sweet to balance that out. And so that's where you end up seeing honey, chutney, jam tend to go with your more intense cheese flavors, especially your umami heavy ones, to balance them out.
Got it. Got it. Thank you, Ryan. This was really a lot of fun. The comments that are on the side are very complimentary of your presentation this evening. I really appreciate all the time that it took in you making the selections of the cheeses and the wines in your presentation tonight.
American cheese, by the way, is totally real cheese. It's just real cheese I don't like very much.
So I'm going to ask everybody, because I'm going to do a roll call. So if you can, turn your sound on. Take yourself off mute. Look on your screen for that little microphone button and take yourself off mute.
Turn your sound on.
I turned it on.
All right. And I'm going to do a roll call. Everybody who's from New York, let's have it here. All right. How about people from Florida? Who's from Florida?
Right here?
Anybody still on from Florida?
Yeah.
We're here.
All right. We've got people from Maryland. Anybody from Maryland still on?
I'm here.
There you are.
Are you there?
Mute this.
How about Washington, D.C.? Are you still on?
Like, while you're down here, you know.
To Kathy Vanzetti.
Pennsylvania?
Jack Jack. Hi, Jack Jack.
How about Illinois? We got people from Illinois? Illinois in the house. How about Connecticut? How about Missouri?
The goat cheese.
Yes.
Thank you, Missouri. How about Massachusetts?
She's calling the people.
Massachusetts in the house?
They were ooh, when she says New
We've
Jersey.
got Virginia. Anybody from Virginia still on?
Yeah, back from New York.
All right. How about New Jersey? How about Texas? Anybody from Texas on?
Where are they? Where's
like us. No.
some more?
I think we have people from South Carolina joining us tonight. Are you still on?
Yes, here we are.
No.
Hello. How about Maine?
Yay.
And California. Any of the Californians doing
Yay.
Woo!
That's Nicole. That's Nicole.
Well, that is it for this evening.
Right there. She had
Rhode Island.
Hi, Greg and Janice.
Oh, North Carolina. I'm sorry, North Carolina.
Did we get Wisconsin?
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. All right. Who else did I miss? Who else did I miss?
Rhode Island.
Rhode Island. There you are.
Oh, then, yeah.
Great job, Ryan.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, great job, Ryan.
Fantastic. Ryan, fantastic.
Don't forget to come visit us on our website at heartstohomes.org and follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
From our hearts.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Great job.
Thank you, Ryan.
Bye.
Bye, Karen.
Great job, Ryan.
Stay on the line.
We're leaving. I shut it down.